Welcome to Ruminations on Tony's Tall Tales, where stories take the stage. I'm your host, Anthony Pavelich, and with me today are two very special guests. My main man, Mitch, who is the host of Ruminations from the Red Room, and Triple C. He is the host of the podcast Brevity Box. Definitely check them out. We are on the Ruminations Radio Network. You can view us there at ruminationsradionetwork.com. And they definitely have some great content to share with you. How are you today, gentlemen?
I'm good, Charlie. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for inviting me, man.
Yeah, appreciate you joining as well. This is a very special episode today. We are paying tribute to the late and great Sir Sean Connery. We were saddened to hear of his passing last month at the age of 90. Although he had been retired from acting for some time, he undoubtedly left an indelible impression and a collection of work that will stand through time. Having portrayed one of the most famous characters in fiction works, he will most notably be remembered as Bond. James Bond. Though his filmography contains many other memorable characters and lines, it's hard to say that this singular character does not hold the most sway. So let's dive right into the heart of it. Was Sean Connery the best James Bond? Just diving right in, just going full speed, baby.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts, Mitch?
I mean, for me, I wouldn't say that I'm a hardcore huge Bond fan. I always go see the new Bond. I really enjoy the Bond films. Is he the best James Bond? I don't think that even needs answering because it's pretty clear. I think so. I don't, I always associate the role with him. And I know that that's kind of unfair to some of the later actors because a lot of them have done fantastic work. But he really set the stage. He set the bar really high. And one thing that I always believe is that we're always getting better, right? We're expanding and we evolve. And I mean that even in the arts. So I would have expected by now someone would have surpassed him as the best James Bond. But in my mind, it still hasn't happened.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. It's funny because when I was a young, like when I was a boy, I remember Roger Moore, but I do think he's the preeminent Bond figure. Like I think he set the bar for masculinity and sort of how that character was suave that they've tried to meet with the following choices for Bond. And I think it's something that's almost stuck in the mind of Bond fans and why it's so hard to adjust to certain Bonds over others, right? Like people didn't go for Timothy Dalton. He was masculine, but he didn't have that debonair, suave, handsome thing. And they, as they get around those different benchmarks, it's all stuff that was set by Sean Connery. That image of what Bond is, I think, was all him carving it out in the eyes of cinema or movies. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, and that's the question I wanted to pose to you both is, do you think because he left such a mark as the first, also too, he had the advantage of being the first, that it almost made it a little unfair to anybody who followed after that? Because you left your mark, and you kind of, the entire world and audience, that was their first introduction to James Bond. So it's kind of it's one of those things where could they just not get it out of their head?
Well, Charlie made a really good point when he said something about the way he said it was that like the following actors. Damn it, I'm sorry, man. I'm just gonna misquote you.
No, it's all right.
But I think it really is like every Bond afterwards was kind of at least a little bit modeled on him. So everyone was kind of leaning back on that, and I think it's going to take something enormously huge to get out from underneath that shadow, like cast a female Bond. And I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves and get into that discussion, but I think if you don't do that, everyone will always be in that shadow, like you said, of the first.
I agree with that.
It's tough to redefine.
I think that's very spot on from where I'm sitting. I think that's the only way you can get away from that, let's say, paradigm, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. And I think that's the thing. I mean, it's outlined in a book. The Bond character is something on paper. And then you've got somebody like, he's iconic in anything, right? I mean, I think the memory that always sticks, that's fun because it sticks, is Highlander. But it's just, even in these cases where he's other characters, you feel, that's what I don't know enough about Sean Connery to know this, but it would almost seem like it was such a pairing that Bond as a character had these suave, slick, good looking, sort of masculine, all these different switches are flipped, and it just so happens to be that Connery came in and put his like permanent mark and spin on it, to a point where even the cadence of things like shaken not stirred, or the Bond, James Bond, it's all carried through, and it's now to the point where if like I was saying, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, those are all guys that did a great Bond, but they didn't necessarily change the character until this most recent one, who's clearly very athletic comparatively to other Bonds, but I think Sean Connery just sort of left his mark, and people have been busy trying to wear daddy's boots,
So yeah, so then do we have to qualify it then? Where is he the best James Bond as the character?
As written?
Yeah. Or as just the best version of James Bond?
I think he's the best interpretation of the character that you could probably get right now, but we always say that until we see something better, right? So I mean, he wasn't even my first James Bond. I mean, I think I'm with Charlie. Roger Moore was probably my first. Yeah. Or did you say Timothy Dalton was your first Bond?
No, Roger Moore was my first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dirty.
That sounds really, it's a great conversation. It was Roger Moore all the way.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, even seeing other Bonds first, or, he's still, you go back to that because my dad was a fan, and he said, okay, let me show you the real James Bond, and it's tough. I mean, Hollywood, they've got to have a hard time stepping into roles. I mean, there are a lot of them like that out there, like Batman, Superman, these larger than life characters that you try and recast, but sometimes living under the shadow of someone who did it first.
Well, it makes me feel like, if I can offer, maybe most significant, and maybe if you go further than that, you might say most significant masculine male interpretation, maybe best boomer interpretation of 007. I think you can keep narrowing it down, because he is those things.
Yeah.
And then I think about movies like In Like Flint, and even spoof versions of it, like what is it, Dragnet or Naked Gun characters that are supposed to be the opposite of that. There's still this shell that I feel like they're trying to fit in, that was of course carved out initially by the writing for James Bond, but Sean Connery brought it to life in a way that, think about that casting director, right? That guy was like Sean Connery, and nobody knew.
I'd love to hear that story,
that it was gonna make that difference, to where now we get to really, I mean, all the names, right? It was Timothy Dalton, and then was it Pierce Brosnan?
I think so.
Yeah, Pierce was after Well, I think there was that in between George Lansbury,
He just
and
got
then
one, right?
yeah, he got one, but then Pierce was essentially the new.
Remington Steele himself.
Remington Steele. I liked
Yeah,
Remington
I
Steele
love
as Bond.
Remington Steele, but again, it's that same that suaveness that that particular set of if you were building a character, it's all stuff that Connery did in a way that these guys are putting their own spin on Connery's way. I don't think they're putting their own spin on the
The
Bond
character.
character.
Yeah.
I think they're doing it as Bond per Connery, and that's I think it's interesting if like looking at it that way, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. But I still think even there you're going to have homage. You're always going to have some homage to Sean Connery in that role.
Yeah, and what's interesting is Ian Fleming did not appreciate in the beginning Sean Connery's casting. He was actually felt, ironically, Sean Connery was not rough enough, was too
Oh, wow.
refined, and
Oh,
at that
really?
time, Connery had not done a lot of. He wasn't like a big star. He had been
Oh,
working for
exactly.
a long time, but he was not the atypical star yet. And it wasn't until James Bond where he just, blew up into the zeitgeist. But it was interesting that the author of Bond had initially seen him as not rough enough, or at least have that edge that Bond was originally written as. And that's what's very interesting about Connery is I think he fits, and why everybody thinks he is the best James Bond is he does probably out of all the Bonds the best straddling between both spheres, where he has that rough and tumble. You really think that Connery could throw down if
You know,
needed
he
to.
he actually seemed more rough and tumble as the years went on. Like in some
Exactly.
of his latter roles,
Oh,
man.
the years did him favors.
Oh
I
yeah, he
think,
did great.
but for me,
But
that
then
turning point's Untouchables. I know I'm jumping ahead, but that I think is where the modern image of our Gen X and beyond. That's where I think it took a turn and became something different. But I'm jumping
and
ahead. I'm
if you rewatch some of those older Bond films, you do see kind of that a little bit where you can understand, oh, I could see where he might have been a little too debonair, but
Mm.
he straddles both of the lines, I think, better than most, where he could throw on the suit and tie, but then he could jump off the boat, and dive into the ocean.
He's Chris Hemsworth, man. I mean, that's he would be Thor if he were young
Mm.
and here today. He's got the
And blonde.
yeah, I mean, he's got that build. That's the thing. He is a force, and he kind of just carries that with him in every
Yeah.
role.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you not? I don't know of another. I mean, maybe when Dwayne Johnson is 70 and he stars in The Rock, starring The Rock, and it's a remake of The Rock, maybe then we'll have another, uh, older guy that again, you know, still had a lot of those qualities that were very James Bondish, right?
Well, he had a
I mean,
big like rebirth in those or in the 90s, didn't? I mean, what was he doing in the 80s and then like in the late 80s, 90s? I mean, he never really
Highlander,
went away, but he had
Untouchables.
kind of a renaissance,
You
a
mean
strong
Connery?
renaissance.
But no, were we talking about Connery, like what he ended up
He
doing
like
in
kind
the
of
80s?
blew up again, like later in life.
We had Time Bandits, man. Brought him back.
Really did it.
God about that. That's true. There,
But
but you got to admire. Like I admire that. I don't want to jump ahead of anything, but I really, I have a comment about when he gets into some of those movies.
but yeah, it's interesting. I was gonna mention into kind of quickly go back to the dovetailing between his Bond and the other Bonds. He again straddled that line, I think, very well, and I think that's why it's been difficult for other Bonds to essentially, elevate. in the audience's mind as being as good or even better than Sean Connery. What's interesting is Daniel Craig. What my first Bond was actually Pierce Brosnan, and Pierce ended up,
Really? That's
yeah, which is really fascinating because GoldenEye was 25 years ago now, which
Jeez.
is shocking to me. And I think I'd heard of my dad talk about Bond, but there was never any sort of introduction to the older movies back then for me. And I just remember watching GoldenEye. I think I saw it on the theaters, and I just was enamored by it. I just loved the um, just the excitement, the action, the yeah, very very sophisticated spy, and
Well,
just
you're a
like the world.
sophisticated guy. I can see how Bond would appeal to you. Like
Well,
you've always
yeah, that
really
kind of
struck
was
me.
like exactly. That was like in the heyday when I was like at my peak,
Your peak
trying
sophistication guy.
trying to ball out.
listen, listen. This is seriously one of the best come on lines ever. Is to go up to somebody and go, "You don't understand. I'm at my peak sophistication. I think if we miss this opportunity, we'll regret it." So, dinner at 8.
This is it right now.
Yeah, I think well also too. I was trying really hard. I think peak in the sense that I was really pushing hard to lean into it, and over time I think it's aged a lot better. It's a little bit more refined.
Well, I found, I mean, I thought Pierce Brosnan, I was such a Remington Steele fan. It was one of those shows. This is funny. Okay. So my mother is, has crushed on Sean Connery for as long as I can remember. Like, and it would be in that sort of 1950s way. Anytime we'd see something and Sean Connery did anything, it would be one of those, oh, what a man kind of
Like clutch your
moments, right?
pearls.
You know, right, exactly. And I remember we would watch Remington Steele. Now, I never drew the connection before,
Mhm.
right? And she becomes a huge Pierce Brosnan fan. And I remember at the time Timothy Dalton had gotten announced as Bond, we were hoping it was going to be Pierce Brosnan. And I
Oh yeah,
remember being upset that it wasn't.
interesting.
You know, so when GoldenEye came out, it was I was very excited about it, you know. And I know this isn't necessarily just about Bond, but I think there's some correlation there. You know, that's, those characters are characters that I think are all paying this kind of homage to that maybe a Bond trope if there was one,
Mhm.
right? And that's where like you have Remington Steele and those kinds of characters, this debonair suave, and then
Yeah,
Moonlighting. If you think about it, was the Bruce Willis's was the hammy, you know, version of that. Still that kind of character, right? There's still
yeah.
these like that was blue collar Bond, right? Is Moonlighting.
You said it's not about Bond, and yeah, it's this is about Sean Connery, Sir Sean Connery. But what does it say about the man and the role and the impact he had? That I mean, if you talk about Sean Connery, you talk about Bond.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
that's
a good point.
kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's he when you do think about it, and this is one of the questions I wanted to pose was why do you think Sean Connery, not just for the character, but why is he remembered so fondly? What was it about him that just kind of struck a chord with a lot of audiences?
Mitch,
That accent,
amongst other things, sure.
amongst other things. I don't know, and I don't know if you want to address this or get into this, and it's hard for me to always to it's hard to separate artist from art. It's hard to separate some
Glad you
of the
said that.
the issues that come up with a yeah, everyone's human. He's just a human. He's just a human man doing a job. So with some of the things he said, some of the positions he's had or he had, um, it's hard to understand exactly what endeared him for so long. For
Mhm.
just so many. I don't know how well it would, he would fly today in our environment now, but he was old school. He was the old guard.
Might be president.
And what's that?
I said he might be president.
Oops.
Careful.
Careful. Really no. No, but I mean, my favorite Sean Connery, and I know he's got a ton of so many credits to his name, but my favorite role was Dr. Jones Sr.
Mhm.
And
Oh
that's because he
yeah.
was like he's like my grandpa. He was, but still had this wonder and this excitement and he just exuded that in any role, whether it was in The Rock when he was playing a hard ass, or whether he's Dr. Jones, or whether he's Bond. There was something, the twinkle in the eye, that regardless of anything else, you still couldn't help but be attracted to that. It's just something, it's ineffable, and it's something in human nature we just sometimes can't define.
Yeah.
I gotta piggyback on your first sentiment there too. I am 100% guilty of separating the artist from the art to a point where I'm thinking of them as two separate things. I'm not saying that in defense of anything. I'm such a huge movie fan, and I'm more focused on the character in that movie and the film.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of feel I don't want to say right, but I feel like I have the ability to cast, walk and chew bubblegum, right? Like I can say, man, what a great role. He's really, you know, not a good person, and then kind of outline how that works. And the joke I always say to people about this is I still listen to Thriller. You can do the math
Uh,
on that one if you want to.
yeah.
Um,
I wish I was better at that. I wish I were. I think that that's an admirable trait, but I kind of agonize over it.
I certainly have my moments. I want to say that, but I feel like when you're like the beauty of movies and stuff to me is that you can forget about you're in this agreed upon bubble of fiction, right? That you're in my mind, in my crazy mind, I guess. But not. I don't know. I feel like I don't know how he would fly today either. But the question of why he's so well remembered, I think, is I made the joke about Chris Hemsworth earlier, but I think when you're well spoken, charming, good looking, and you fit a lot of like widely interpreted, sort of universally interpreted as iconic on a lot of things. He's masculine. He sort of defines masculinity in general, but also very much for his time. And the character of Bond is sort of that, you know, I mean, the perfect marriage of very smart, very charming, very intelligent, very cultured,
Very
very
capable.
manicured, very tough. He can fight. He's Superman without superpowers. He's Batman in a tux with a smile and not a batarang. And so it's like I think they really cast it so well that he fit those things so well, and I think that's what the people of his time, like young men of his time, whether you even like Bond or not, you sort of like didn't have a problem with Sean Connery as Bond, you know. And I
Yeah.
think to what you were saying before, one of my favorite movies in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, it it says something about the man that he would be able having that ability to be the tough guy as represented before and after that movie. He totally plays this vulnerable dad, which is amazing. And Harrison Ford does all the heavy lifting as the tough guy to the point where the comedy brilliance in that movie for Sean Connery to be the straight man and how he's not impressed with his son's toughness and or his name, you know. I just he was an incredible actor. Maybe is I mean, do you know was he trying to get away from being saddled with Bond? Was he running away from Bond, do you think, in some of these movie choices?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think for every person who's played the Bond character, it's a heavy burden because again, like you said, it's very easy for you to be typecast, but then also too, it's the double-edged sword. You know, with that, you have a certain level of notoriety and cachet where you can try to leverage into other works. But then a lot of times, yeah, they want to pigeonhole you into that archetype, because it's been so successful. So, I mean, Daniel Craig before this last one, he was, I think, because I think also too, it takes so much out of you. You know, when you think about or at least from my experience with seeing a little bit of the business, there's a level at that stage where it's just so much of it is riding on you. Like, you have to produce at such a high level, very consistently for a long period of time, that it becomes very draining.
It
You know,
seems like
because now
it's
they've
on, right?
become, yeah, they've become very big productions, in terms of size, scope, so much money, so many things are writing on it. Um, so much is tied into it now, beyond just the movie. And then too, like, you know, if you're coming after some of the greats that have ever done it, then yeah, there's a weight to it that just must be utterly exhausting, and not to count the physical effort that you're putting into these pictures that are becoming bigger, and if we gotta, you know, we've gotta make the next one, you know.
Well, I feel like Daniel Craig has carved, like, if anything, he's been, in my opinion, the one who's been able to sort of make the character his own
Yeah,
through his physical fitness and through some of that more kinetic
yeah,
uh, atmosphere that he brings to the character, and he's very, you know, again, fits a lot of those same standards that Sean Connery sort of carved out. And you know, and kind of what you were saying, as exhausted as he may have been, maybe that's what led him to go for some of those movie choices like Highlander, which I still love to this day. I love seeing him ride up on his horse in that movie. That scene is great. I don't know why he has a katana. I forgot, but I think it's also great. And you know, just I love that movie as a kid. And then Untouchables,
or
you
no, he's
know,
a Spaniard from Spain.
yeah, right, with a
But he's got
Scottish
the accent.
as, and I mean, bringing a knife to a gunfight, him delivering that line, and the Untouchables, I thought was a another, you know, I just think all of that. I like when I see actors like Sean. Well, I guess there's nobody like Sean Connery, but you know, people taking on roles that are sometimes wacky, seemingly, but they still, you can't fault him for any of them. You love him in everything.
Yeah.
I still think The Rock was the, you know, that that I still think that to me was the '90s, like Sean Connery rebirthed in another. He had 3 or 4 different lives. It almost seems like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, yeah, I think, I don't remember if he's ever said it specifically, in an interview or anything, but yeah, I definitely would not be surprised if, you know, that's why he took some of those roles, or he looked at certain scripts, um, wanting to, because, you know, it's a long shadow. Um,
When he's the man who would be king, right? I mean, that movie was, you know, nobody's seen that movie now, but in those times, people like my parents still love those movies. American Movie Classics plays anything like that. That's what they think of.
so for Mitch, was, um, that character, Dr. Jones, your favorite out of his works?
One of my favorites. I mean, if not probably my favorite. I also was very fond when I was a kid of Darby O'Gill and the Little People, and my dad used to sing that song that he sings to his Bonnie Lass, and so I mean, I have warm feelings for that one, and I think the older Bond. See, look, see, even when I just talk about him, I just think he's Bond. Older Sean Connery is one of my favorites, But yeah, probably Dr. Jones was just my favorite role, just because I was also such a big Indiana Jones fan.
Me
So there
too.
was something about seeing James Bond be Indiana Jones's dad that just made a lot of sense.
It did. It did
I
make
was
a
like, okay,
lot of
yeah,
sense.
of course, I believe that completely.
Yeah, and it was really touching the little note that Harrison Ford had sent out after hearing the passing. Just it, you could tell too when two actors have chemistry, because they had to have so much fun, because it exudes out of their performance and out of that whole picture. Their relationship, it just seemed like it fit. Seemed like it was very easy for them, and just
Well, comedy's hard, right? And
yeah,
I mean, Indiana Jones would always have these great moments of just great comedy throughout the series, and to put two icons together, and both pillars of masculinity in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and to have them be able to, for those of you who haven't seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, that there's a scene where they are tied back to back in these chairs, and a fire is breaking out, and they're trying to figure out how to survive. And the way that they work with each other, and the way that it comes off, it's this crazy juxtaposition that ends up being hilarious physical comedy, and the timing's great for the those are two grade A actors making it look easy.
My favorite part in that scene was when he says, "I'm assuming is the next man." He's like, "I was the next man," because they had slept with the same.
That's right. And
yeah.
Dad, what? Dad, what?
Oh, they were fantastic in that movie together. Yeah, absolutely.
So Charlie, I think you've already mentioned a little bit of some of your favorites. Was there one? Was Highlander one of those pictures
I
that you
th-
found?
I think the character roles that I'm drawn to with him are these sort of like a Mr. Miyagi role. Like in
Yeah,
Highlander, he plays this wise, giving leadership and direction. And then in the same thing in Usual Suspects, he's this
Yeah.
beat cop who knows how to do this. He's going to give uh, direction to Elliot Ness, and coach him through, almost like a father figure. I think he played those roles well. I admire characters who in movies who die. I like the loss bit. I like the acting of that, and I think he plays that role great in both events. It I took me right there with him. So I just feel like the acting and especially in the Untouchables was great. I have a hard time not just fawning all over The Rock, because I think the whole trope of tough old man was sort of put into the zeitgeist right there. Like, and I know it sounds in a weird way, it was another character role that he's just defined. Like, I can't think of all the examples right now, but I feel like there's probably quite a few of the first image you see of this 70-year-old man carved from stone. In The Rock, it's the long hair, this, being marched through. And I still think that tough old guy trope, that was old Bond effectively, but
I
it
think you're
was
right. I don't think that was represented on film before that. That was what, 96,
yeah,
'The
'95,
Rock,
96.
yeah,
I,
96.
Well, I mean, like, when was there an ever a 70-year-old man, or he
going
wouldn't
in
run
with
in
a
his
SEAL
60s.
team,
Yeah, like that was never done before. I think
not that I could
you're
think
right.
of, not that I could think of like that. And he was, a seedy trickster out for himself Bond
Hmm.
character. And I just think, again, there's him taking a role that if it were played by anybody else might have been way forgettable. But
Yeah.
you know I just that those are my three, and if I had to narrow it down to one in a tough tie between The Rock and Untouchables, I'd probably go with The Rock. Just too much fun. Too much
Yeah.
Connery love in that movie. Thank you for proving my point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know this too when I was looking at it. He had turned down the role of Simon Gruber in Die Hard with a Vengeance due
Oh,
to he felt the diabolical nature of the character was a little too much.
thank
Um,
you, Mr. Connery,
Is
because
that Irons?
yeah, that went to Jeremy Irons.
yeah, I think he would. I don't think it would have fit him. I really don't. I really think he was smart.
Yeah.
And so, looking at his film, because I was trying to decide too, what were some of the standouts for me, and he didn't do a lot of work after League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and that was in 2003. Um,
Ahead of its
before,
time, right? Isn't that
yeah,
weird to think about that?
yeah, it's really, and it'd be interesting because I'd really want to rewatch that now and see how that holds up because, yeah, I feel like that was one of those films that was just it was too early.
Well,
And
I
it
mean, the
probably
whole
would have.
concept of it really kept coming back, right? Whether it was Hellboy or the Avengers or I mean, fill in the blank, X Men, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen had a different take on it.
Yeah. So before that, it was Finding Forrester, then Entrapment with Catherine
Dude,
Zeta-Jones.
Entrapment.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
Um,
She made lasers sexy. I mean,
Yeah.
swish, you know. And even then, he was still this again, this paternal guide character. He's the best,
You
you
know,
know.
there's a lot of complaint, and rightly so. And I think in the industry that there's always this great age difference. There's a discrepancy between like, oh, an older man actor role can be paired with like a younger female role, and no one seems to have a problem with it. Um, but it's very 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 rarely flipped, right? I
Yeah.
think we have Sir Sean Connery to blame for that. Like you believe it when there's like a 60-year-old guy and this 24-year-old you for some reason you're like, "Oh yeah, I could see that." Yeah, so I mean he really kind of set this bad precedent in motion that it was believable cuz he was so damn sexy.
well, it's probably a sense of too kind of what we were touching on a little bit. Why we think he's remembered so fondly is he did exude this. There was this presence about
Mhm.
him, and I think because of the archetype that we built up
Mhm.
as he almost was the prototypical archetype of a sage of the wizened shaman, that would impart knowledge and wisdom. And you look at the films, and yeah, a lot of it is that these younger characters looking to him for answers and for guidance and leadership. And you're probably totally right, Mitch. Is that precedent was set, and almost in an ironic way, it was set by Bond. Bond, like you follow Bond, the reckless, debonair, hard-nosed spy who will get the job done at no cost or at any cost, and you can rely on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the guy represented his generation, um, and
Yeah.
probably in on and off screen, he was a he is a billboard for what a lot of people thought was okay, a lot of people accepted, a lot of people strove for. He was 15, about 15 when World War II ended, right? Being 90. So I
Yeah.
mean,
What that put him back. Yeah.
without without going crazy on his real life antics. I mean, from an era of peak masculinity and a health, they have a dose of chauvinism and
Yeah.
sexism, and he did things that to us now are unacceptable.
Yeah, but that's
And
us. That's also, and I'm not, again, not making excuses or anything, but you're right. Like over time, we change, we evolve, we get better. Even he did from his early
Yeah.
comments, and I think you might be referencing, for example, like hitting a woman.
yeah,
From those early days to his final days or some of the last interviews he gave, he even became more woke, if you will. And we don't, like, for me, I don't ever want to excuse the mistakes of the past. Obviously things were done and were incorrect, especially according to our view now, but we will look back 20-30 years from now, and even our views will seem archaic or unevolved. So we're always evolving, and I think we have to allow room for that. I
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
think it's just an answer to the question of why. Like if we
yeah,
look back
yeah.
and we want to know, well, why did he do that? I think it's not similar to the example I'm about to display, with the exception of the fact that it's not aged well, and it's not something that people look at the same way as they would have in, say, 1955. You just
Yeah,
don't break out the paddle with the holes in it to totally whip the backside of your child as much as maybe people felt like it was okay, or
yeah,
dad pulling his belt off, or these are things that are from a different century. Like, I think
yes,
people forget that it's a different century, and I'm not
yeah,
excusing it, and I'm glad
yeah,
we've gotten past it. But he is, that's who he was, that's where he was from, right?
yeah,
And it's very interesting rewatching some of those earlier Bond films, and there are a lot of cringe-worthy moments in it in
yeah,
them, and
Yeah.
it's interesting to see because obviously this is kind of like a Bond problem, in the sense of this is the character, and how do we deal with that now in this time and this place. Um, it goes a little bit to, I think you earlier mentioned, Mitch, about the possibility of Bond becoming a woman um, in future releases. Um, and that's an interesting topic, and that's obviously something that we'll probably keep discussing for, unfortunately, some time.
Can I sneak in a question real quick for you,
Yeah.
sir? So, without having to give away too much with your spec script, what challenges are you facing with adapting that character and avoiding some of those pitfalls?
I think just being knowledgeable.
Sure.
One of the things I think Pierce Brosnan had talked about later on in the films that he was doing was he did get tired of the quips, in
Uh-huh.
the sense that it just felt like they were just put in there because the writers felt like it had to be in there to you know for whatever reason, either to make sure that Bond stayed Bond, or that was just the character. So these innuendos, these sexual advances. Um,
Yeah, where is the core of the character? At what point does the character change? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting. Just it's more, and I think also too the way out of it is making dealing with some of those issues within the character itself. Like having him confront some of those things maybe head on, whether
Yeah.
that be a
Ooh, yeah.
personification of the situation that he's in, or he's presented with an obstacle that kind of puts him you know,
Are
in line
you
with that.
pitching a mini series about Bond's therapy sessions? Because I'm in. I'm 100% in. I want to see this breakdown of Bond
Analyze
coming to
Bond.
terms. Yeah, just he slowly comes to terms with the man he's always been, and he's horrified.
With Yeah, and without revealing too much, it's almost I'm going a little bit meta with it in the
Yeah.
script.
I just
So
had this slow melodic version of Secret Agent Man playing in my head, like all sad and teary.
You could get Mel to sing it.
I'm a secret agent man.
yeah, but that's an interesting question, Mitch. I think it's just not having just being conscientious, of not throwing those in there just for the sake of having a purpose. If they need to be in there, there's a specific purpose for them, but then also to being conscientious of you know
Yeah.
not not furthering the perpetuating the cycle.
Gotcha.
Can I got something a comment on that, and I actually I like, so I think it's important to, or I think it's really impacting when you can capture someone having, like you were saying, kind of presenting a moment ago about having to be confronted with it in some way. I like that. I like that kind of character development in real life with real people. I also like that kind of character development in stories on any format, books, movies, television. I like seeing the awkward, uncomfortable growth of a character having to learn, and even if it's a clunky process, until they get to a point where they've learned their lesson or whatever the transition is. I like that formula is something that I'm really, I like that kind of, I like being a part of that. And I think if you even if it's just friends or people that maybe stumble into those things, I think it's important to capture those moments and kind of go through them. Like it's kind of a necessary um, conundrum, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting now, uh, watching. Yeah, it's very layered. I think with the whole discussion and where we are now, and you know, but I think though it comes back again to, unfortunately in our society we haven't had a good, transition of being able to reconcile our ability from transferring to boyhood into manhood. And I think that's what's caused a lot of these issues to arise, is because, uh, we are staying boys very far into our the age where we should be, men.
Have you been talking to my mom? Sounds like
I
it.
don't know. I don't know, Mitch.
I mean, I take your point, but I think that part of that, this is a huge discussion, right? But I think that you don't have a lot of, you're starting to get, I think, a more modern representation of what that term means. And I think for, if you're talking about the predominant generation of people that's in charge, all the way through to movies, let's say up until 2010, the idea of leading man or masculinity or virile sexuality in men, it's always taken, and we've kind of alluded to that with the Bond character. Somebody set a mold for it, and like Mitch referenced, we've progressed and evolved and grown, and now those terms and those things are not, there's a lot more diversity to what that could mean. There's a lot of different kinds of men. And I think now you've got a time where we're trying to figure out what those different kinds of men have in common. If you're going to talk about those, you know, like break it down to what universal characteristics exist in them, it, some of that stuff that was represented by Sean Connery as a man and Sean Connery as Bond the character are just not, they're not as ubiquitous anymore, right? There's a lot of different ways they could do that, and you don't know if the
Yeah.
world would accept it. Like it's smarter than to go with a woman Bond, because I don't think the world as a whole probably would be sadly not accepting of a homosexual Bond.
I think I understand your point. I that's
You
Yeah.
see what
I
I
think
mean, though?
I see. I think I see what you mean. I think more of my reference was to, just the base archetype, and I think what's, you know, and allowing too much of the shadow archetype instead of it being fully integrated into the psyche, it's become overriding. So then those qualities are predominant. So those negative shadow qualities are predominant, that then turn into, abusive, towards towards people, to women, subjugating others, and just being unkind and unruly, being masochistic, um, and just we just haven't had, as a society, been well equipped to allow proper growth into a more harmonious integration with those archetypes. So that's why we remain childish, we may remain boyish in our attitudes and our beliefs and our perspectives, and then that in turns keeps us from, treating people, especially women, with the respect, the admiration that is appropriate. We tend to go the reverse, and I think
So you
that's.
think things are getting worse?
I don't think it's getting worse. I just think the root cause of it is something that we haven't really addressed yet. I
Hmm.
think we're starting to understand. I think what we are at is we're understanding the effects of that behavior. We just haven't gotten to the place where we know how to actually begin resolving it from the root. We're still just dealing with the symptoms.
Hmm.
And
I,
I
I
think
think the
that,
root's dying. I think it's being
Yeah, I
bred
think so.
out. I think it's the older generations and their teachings on that thing are fading away now with time and natural, you know.
I think we're
true, but
growing to a point where these definitions, several times, I think we've come back to that idea of what's a man, what's masculinity, all these things, and I think we're getting to a point where those definitions are becoming less important. It's more about what kind of a person you are, what kind of a human you are. There's no single definition of what's masculine, and eventually, I think when we are become truly enlightened, we'll recognize that those things are really kind of inconsequential, that it's the core of the being that matters most, and we won't seek those
We're,
definitions anymore.
well,
yeah.
true, but I think that's the thing. It's not so much talking about labels. I'm really talking about the biology and the the physical that needs to be understood and then properly integrated and balanced. I think what's happening is we can't have one extreme or the other. And we can't go so far where we lose some of the actual the what's the proper word that I want to use? The, it's not that the archetypes are inherently bad. It's just the problem is we go one extreme or the other. We don't properly integrate both halves, and
Hmm.
therefore get to that place that you're talking about, Mitch, where it's no longer um, defined or being seen as a label, but it's just a matter of moving through the world in a more harmonious and all-encompassing manner. And I think that's we don't want to lose the strength of this particular archetype, but we still want to
Sure.
be able to have the sensibilities and the softness of the other archetype, and then integrate both of them into basically Superman.
Well, I kind of feel like that to me is a statement that archetype isn't necessarily ever going to go away, but its place in like how it fits into our world as a culture is not the same. Not only because it's like the idea of having that Sean Connery character, it's not gone, but it's
Yeah.
also not the mainstay. Thing. It's not. It doesn't. There's a lot of different things that archetype doesn't represent. So it has a place at the table, but the table's got a lot more seats, and that those seats are filled with
I like that vision.
different archetypes, right? And you know, like it almost has to be a timestamp. Like this is masculinity circa 20th century, 1960, and you
Yeah.
kind of have a bubble of what all that means,
Well, it
and
also
then
provides a dynamic range
right, right,
for your different characters whenever you're doing.
and that look that might be. I like I said, I think that being represented as a part of our world is right because it is part of our world, but
Yeah.
it's no longer, at the head of everything. There's a lot of political references I could make here that would be really fitting and funny, but I'm not going to. But thankfully, as of a couple of weeks ago, no, it feels like the world has been ready to move on from that, and it is in their storytelling and how they're approaching it. I think it's kind of why it might make more sense that they're going with the idea of a female Bond, and wouldn't it be interesting to see if maybe you're onto something and they tackle promiscuity from a more cerebral sense and why that's happening, if they even give it to that character at all? Would they? And if they didn't, would it be wrong of them not to? So, you know what I'm saying? Like, would that be too non-egalitarian, right? Maybe that character should have the same issue. And so I think it's interesting to explore it from all those fronts.
Yeah, I think there might have been some confusion on what I was mentioning.
I
As
may
a
have
plot
lost
point.
it. I'm
No, I
sorry.
No,
think I don't think there's confusion so much as we just keep going off on different tangents. I think that there's so much to unearth here. There's a lot to unpack and dig into, but that's how it goes.
well, no, I was just meaning that the energies of it's basically the masculine archetypes within it's they're set within each one of us.
Uh huh.
And so it's not that it's different personalities or different opinions or different, like I like your analogy, seats at the table, but it's more about all of us have these same archetypes and how we integrate those with the shadow versions of the archetypes is what really allows us to excel and really get to that place of harmony. Um,
I think Triple C and I are the wrong guys. I think we need Mike and Juicy J with their psych educations in here because you're talking about shadow types, the dweller on the threshold, that kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know
well,
much
did you ever hear about? I think it was Robert Moore and another person who name escapes me, but the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover.
about.
As those are the preeminent. Those are the four male masculine archetypes that every male person has. But then the underneath is those shadow version that can cause havoc if we don't properly accept them and integrate them into those
What are the
archetypes.
if you could
Yeah,
explain what the shadow version is so that we understand
like
what
at
is
the end
the
of
Yeah.
shadow
So
Splinter Cell,
version
when
of
you
the
got to fight your shadow
magician and the
self.
lover?
the king would be the tyrant or the weakling, and then the warrior would be the sadist or the masochist. The magician would be the detached manipulator or the denying innocent one, like the martyr, the victim. The lover would be the addicted lover, insatiable taste, um, and then the impotent lover who has not accepted his masculine energies and allowed them to be part of his sensuality.
So Game of Thrones. We're talking about every character from Game of Thrones.
Sorry, we went like so deep. I think I just like down the rabbit hole. It just, yeah,
Yeah, I
but
think
yeah.
when you were making references of archetypes and getting to through harmoniously, I was thinking in terms of culture and
Yeah.
society. I wasn't. I think I got lost on a different track there, man. I'm sorry.
No, I think I started going into, yeah, the rabbit hole of stuff that um, I've been kind of looking at and trying to, just trying to analyze within my own self. Because, I want to be able to be a better person. I want to be able to treat people with more respect, compassion, and obviously look at my biases and my views that I may or may not have had or not really acknowledged or try to look at how I can improve, as a male person to,
Do you
some of
feel
my
like Connery represents a
I
part of
was
that
just gonna
spectrum?
say yes. That's what I
Like
was just thinking.
I'm sorry,
Wonder
represents
Twins?
what spectrum?
I would say, do you feel like Connery, in terms of what you were saying about uh, the archetypes and their opposites. I mean, where do you think Connery fits in on that spectrum?
And I think that's what's interesting is going back and watching some of these films, looking at some of these people that we really looked up to, and realizing, oh, maybe their views on certain things, especially when it came to women and females, wasn't really something that I want to necessarily be, you know.
It wasn't an aspiration. It shouldn't have been, or it wasn't ever. But they're no longer the um, role model because
Yeah.
maybe that was wrong.
So
But I think it's
definitely
very
his
telling.
way of treating women, kind of as objects, essentially,
Yeah.
is just there to satisfy his desires. That's definitely very prominent. Um, he is a manipulator, so a little bit of that is like what he
Talk
does
about
with
Bond or Connery?
Bond. Yeah,
Oh,
sorry. So that character represents some of those qualities that, yeah, aren't something that you really want to emulate. But I think what we ended up getting wrapped up into, and a little bit of the trap, is the excitement for those seems very great in the short term, but we don't understand that some of those aren't really, they're not applicable to real life. Or if they are, there's consequences that we don't realize, which obviously we are seeing play out. These people would take advantage of women, thinking that it was fine. Other people would look away or not say anything, thinking that it was not necessarily a big deal, or it wasn't their right to say something, or they should get involved. And the
it's also a
consequences.
fictional character, right? I mean, this is something that it's just that character was written uh, early 1900s, right? And before it ever became a film. These are as far as archetypes or description of the character of Bond. I think it's from a time that's, like I said, very beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Is and Connery. I think it's interesting for me because I think the conversation is taking on this search to find the boundary that separates the character of James Bond from the actor Sean Connery. And that's there is right, and you see him taking pieces of that character into other parts that he had, but he's definitely the actor and the man, and a man who was 90 when he passed, and he is representing that generation and the way the world was. That is the way the world was at that point in time. And it's interesting to kind of try to figure out. I don't know if he brought that. Like, I don't think he took on the role of Bond and was like, it'd be really great if he was a womanizer. Can we write that in? Like, I think it was in the script, and then he went in and sort of pulled off the debonair suave. And I think we were all um uh living vicarious. I think a lot of men at that age were living vicariously through James Bond characters. The man who could do anything, the man who could save the day,
Yeah.
the man who was attractive and desired by women, who could just take what he wanted. Like, you know, there's
I just
those.
wanted the car with the missiles. I mean, that was
I
the
wanted
part
the
I wanted
car.
as a kid.
You
Yeah, give
know,
me that. Give me the car with the guns.
yeah. I mean, that's what I thought. Characters like Get Smart. When you have the sort of opposite take on it, that fair to say is sort of a how would you describe that in terms of archetypes, when they'll take Maxwell Smart, who's sort of the short, goofy version played by Steve Carell in the movie, right? And I think that's the funniness of it. Is that a shadow archetype? Because I'm not in the know, and I think it'd be good to understand.
Yeah, I think there's one. It's essentially the dummy, the fool.
The
You're
Fool, yeah.
playing that role.
Pink Panther, man, right? Inspector Clouseau. Was that not? Would you think that was a take on that same kind of approach, the spoof version of Bond, the exact opposite of suave?
Yeah. yeah, showing the opposite version of that.
The absurd version.
Yeah, which almost then leads into satire, essentially, right? The genre of
Yeah.
satire, where you're using that as a method to show absurdity of something.
Does it maybe pose the question that in order for that kind of satire to be funny, in order for like it would not be funny without the stature of the character of Bond? Like without Bond being a thing, are those things at all as hilarious as I mean, sure there's physical comedy and whatnot, but
No, they're completely dependent on that. They're
right.
completely,
I mean,
yeah.
that sort of carves that niche out to be able to laugh and oh, that's not supposed to work. He's got a phone in his shoe. you know.
Yeah. No, I guess it's just more of the point of removing the entertainment aspect of entertainment is helping in some areas to show us, these human qualities. And then what do we do with those in the real life, in the
Mm-hmm.
reality? How do we find that balance of not being the one extreme or the other extreme, but find like, oh, that made me think of something. How can I improve upon my perceptions, or what or my the way I move through the world, how I treat others, how I interact with others. How can I be better, and how can I evolve? Well, ultimately, that's what we hope for, but unfortunately, some of us still get stuck in these certain modes of
Telling
thinking
you,
and acting.
Bond therapy is a mini series that could happen. It's going to do all these things, man. It's going to show us how to evolve, how to take it from the screen to the real world. You know.
Well, this, yeah, definitely took a different turn than I think all three of us were expecting.
No, but it's fun conversation. I hope we can all. I'm having fun. I had a good
I
time.
thought he was a fantastic King Richard. Was that in Robin Hood when he popped up at the end of the really bad Kevin Costner film? He who else could it be but Sean Connery? Like he played that role like over and over. Like who else could it be but Sean Connery?
The man who
Kind of
would
kind
be
of roles.
king,
Yeah,
King Richard, King Arthur.
yeah.
I mean, played King Arthur. He plays. It's he is the he's one of those icons of masculinity. Along if you had a Mount Rushmore of 20th century film masculinity,
Ooh,
who
that's a
else
good
is on
question.
there?
Ooh, okay.
I mean, you have Connery's on there, John
Yeah.
Wayne, Sinatra.
I don't know. I don't know.
I think, yeah, and again, it's like it's these pillars, these icons that, like you were saying, you were talking about, they exude this sort of energy and this strength that I think we gravitated to a lot, because we felt that was something to emulate, because it felt safe, it felt strong against the face of adversity, um, and I
I
think
feel like
that's
you're
what's.
touching on humanities, man. At this point,
Well,
like
no, totally, and I
yeah.
think I think that's I think that's what's really interesting about the work that I'm trying to accomplish, is that I've noticed that that's the theme through everything that I'm trying to develop, is that it's this potential. I think, and trying to put a nicer note on a cap on this, instead of being so downcast, is that I think
Hmm.
we all have this wonderful and beautiful potential to become best versions of ourselves, that if we do the work, the internal work that's necessary, that's uncomfortable, we reap such greater rewards of becoming just greater and better versions of ourselves. And that way, that will help us move through the world in much harmonious ways. And then our interactions with others. And not only that, but then that helps inspire other people to elevate as well. And I think that's why these energies we gravitate towards too, because they are almost the sense of that potential. you know I think where we get trapped and we get stuck a little bit is we don't integrate it properly, or we think that's the only thing, and then that delves into maybe something a little skewed, as that strength then turns into domination. or that strength then turns into oppression of someone that we think,
Would you describe or how, like, I feel like maybe the fact that if we looked back, like when you described looking back at some of those older Bond movies, and there's cringe-worthy moments in them, and old interviews that also cringe-worthy moments. The fact that we are feeling that cringe now, I think on a wider scale, if you were to put it out to X amount of viewers, do you feel like that is definitive of us taking our lessons from that experience? Like, we're identifying those moments as not good, unacceptable, and like we seem to have that. Like, I think Mitch, you even said, I think we all agree those were cringeworthy things, right?
Something to that effect.
Yeah.
For me, go ahead.
No, I'm done. Go ahead, please.
Oh no, Anthony.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead and finish that thought.
Everyone's so polite. No, I wanted you to hear your response to Triple C's question.
I think yes, yes and no, and this kind of goes back to that first conversation we had, Mitch, where it's almost that strange thing where, me, I'm a believer in, time and place, in the sense that you hear things, the information arrives to you at the time when you are pretty much ready for it, or it may have been happened earlier, but you weren't necessarily ready to take in that information. And it could be very much to Triple C's point, where we are now ready for it. It's becoming cringeworthy because now it's we weren't listening to the moments in time where something or someone was trying to tell us, and we dismissed it, and then it became so apparent where it's like, okay, all right, and the universe kept going along and saying, okay, you're not going to listen this time, okay. And then now, where it is becoming more apparent, where we are being faced with it a little bit more extremely, where it's like, okay, you need to acknowledge this, you need to uh, deal with it. So I think that could be a good part of why we're starting to kind of see this and start doing some of this exploration that we may have been putting off, earlier in our lives. But again, I think that goes back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, was that our society, the way it's structured now, doesn't give us good opportunities to do that earlier. So when I was talking about boys moving into manhood properly, we don't have the systems and structures in place, especially in the current society that we live in, that allow that transition to happen appropriately and and in the time that's needed. And that's why we end up being stuck maybe with the tendencies of boys, and with some of these aspects of thinking, oh, this is how I should treat women because, so and so did it, or I was growing up and this was the model that I need to follow, um, instead of transitioning out of that earlier.
Well, yeah, I think the will has to be there. I definitely think there's more will now than there was in 1990. I think there's a lot more will now than there was in 1960. And
Yeah,
so,
but again, we're in so uh, um, the family structure has been broken down too. So there's so many families now are one parent, no parent. So who are the people that are helping uh, the children, move into adulthood, and be properly prepared for that next stage. And I think that's where a lot of the breakdown happens, is that we don't have that as much as we may have used to, or you know
well,
I think we may
that's
have it, but
sorry. Go ahead, please, Mitch. Sorry.
oh, I was gonna say I think we may have it, but it's probably not in the healthiest and best ways.
yeah,
The outlets are not probably in the end going to be the most productive in the evolution of us as a species, as individual cultures across the globe. Who's helping people into adulthood are influencers
yep,
and things like that. And that and there's probably great influencers out there, etc. But the guideposts are
yep.
now they're probably not the best that they could be. Hopefully we'll evolve there too. I haven't lost hope. But I do think that it's really interesting that a podcast that is kind of um, ignited by wanting to pay tribute to this man, this has passed, this great actor, this iconic silver screen superhero. This one singular guy could inspire such deep conversation because of who he was, because of the characters he played. I mean, what an interesting commentary that really is.
But because of when he was too.
Yeah,
because of when he was too, right? I mean, that's also it's those and I'm with you on the humanities part. I think I don't want to jump in, Mitch. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you were finished. My bad.
No, I'm good.
Okay. I think it's a really interesting conversation, but if we start getting into, the percentages of families that have a paternal vacuum, that's not a new phenomena, and there's a lot of ways that it's manifested through, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of years. But if we just go to the 1960s, the divorce rate wasn't very much different than it is now. So I think that the question is sort of ever present. I think I'm with Mitch about it being influencers in the world around you, sort of it takes a village. You have to be able to depend on everybody to have an agreed upon set of standards for, say, civility, or at least common goals on what they're trying to be as a group or as a culture. And I think there's always a generational shift, it seems, but the trajectory is clearly, one direction, right? People used to watch gladiators go into bloody turmoil for entertainment, and thankfully we just do that in movies, and we know it's not real. So I feel like
I don't know. We got UFC, dude.
We do, but it's not to the death.
Have we really evolved all that much?
I'm just saying, it's not. It's still there. It's still with a lot more. So you know what I'm saying there. There's a lot more standards about security. Nobody's being captured, roped up, and thrown into the octagon. You know what I mean?
I'd watch that.
I'd watch that movie.
No, I wouldn't.
But I guess to that point, it's interesting because Dr. No, which is Sean Connery's first James Bond film, was 1962. And we were talking about generational. GoldenEye was 90, what did I say, 95?
Mm-hmm. 95, 96.
That's a generation. But you're seeing the same sort of motifs being played out. And I think, that was my first introduction to Bond. So I was excited about that Bond because it's like, okay, this is the model. This is exciting. I want to be like Bond. I want to act and move through the world like Bond. But that's where some of the trap can find you, is that that's not necessarily the best role model for a youngin like me at that time. But that is what is being displayed to me as the prototypical. That's what a man is. That is somebody who can take charge and who can do whatever he wants. And there's strength in some of that, but then there's consequences with that sort of
I gotta tell you, the thing that occurs to me to say here is those things aren't as conceivable to men under 5'8". I just need to put this into context, man. Like if you're 5'5" and watching Bond, you can wear the best tux, the best shoes, and everything you want to do. The guy next to you that's 6'4", and I'm not saying this in an angry way at all. I think it's hilarious, but it's totally true. Like I like, the first thing in my head right now is, I bet you Tony's probably a good 6 feet or something. Yeah. He's sitting here talking about wanting to move through the world like Bond. I'm like, listen, man, I think Bond rode roller coasters a little earlier than I did.
Yeah, I had to cruise around LA with this guy, man. It was not easy. It was rough.
By the way, great movie idea. Short James Bond with a Napoleon complex sounds like a laugh riot. I would love to see it.
Perfect. We'll get Tom Cruise on that right away.
Whoa.
Boom.
Oh boy. Yeah, I don't. I don't. I don't think I know what point I was trying to make with that.
I'm sorry, man.
No,
Mitch, you
no,
got my
it's
back on my statement though.
brilliant, brilliant. No, I think it was interesting. It was trying to. I think I'm just so wrapped up in it too because I'm trying to understand. You know, as a man, how do
As a
I?
6 foot tall man.
Yeah.
As a Bond figured man in the world, how can I make my rugged ruggishness appear more sensitive, like I should be? I really bear the burden of these struggles. I'm so manly, but I don't want to be that manly.
Yeah, true. No, I mean it really does. That's what it really comes down to. How can we, you know, take what some of these great, you know, people and men and characters did and, you know, aspire to some of those qualities, but then not allow it to, you know, make it twist it a little bit where we don't. I guess it's more again talking from the male female perspective of how as a better human being as a man can I treat, you know, the female counterparts and treat them as compliments as opposed to, you know, something that we're, you know, lord over and that sort of
Well,
thing.
and I would even argue as just a simple egalitarian. Like, does Bond work as a straight equal guy, right? Without any particular parlay to
Yeah,
their
If you
uh,
just take the good,
yeah,
yeah,
does he work?
or you know, I think we start getting into questions like, is strength just strength? Like, you know, like, so you know, you see a Bond type character in that classic Sean Connery style masculine design, and you put that character in a world where that part of his expression doesn't exist, right? He's
yeah,
not a chauvinist. He's not a misogynist. He's not a take advantage. Like, how, I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing. It's a furtherment of the discussion to think about how that would affect perception of his character.
yeah,
You know, and to us, right? To us, to younger than us, and to the people that knew him when he came on board in 1962. Like, if my parents sat down and saw that character, what would they say? You know, and
hmm,
you know, and people use those terms very loosely, right? Strong, weak. You know, I I think of this movie often, but I'll make this reference here because I think the scene kind of fits what we're saying here. Because I think it's defining like masculinity in a way. De Niro wrote a film called Bronx Tale, and it's a classic Italian movie. And in there, there's a discussion between a kid who idolizes a mob man who's very dazzling and
yeah,
strong and you know, mafioso, and his dad who's a bus driver, hardworking blue collar guy. And in a moment, he starts saying, you know, his kid says he thinks his dad's the sucker, and De Niro goes into this big spiel about how he's the tough guy. He's the tough guy. He's the strong guy because he does what he has to do every day, and he does it all the time. And I think that that's a big lesson for that boy. And in this example, we're the boy, right? Where it's kind of the nature of the way I understand it, and maybe wrongly, I'm misinterpreting, but it feels like Connery is that sunny character that Chaz Palminteri plays in terms of like Bond and the way that he treats the people around him, the women around him. And I think you're sort of the blue collar, you know, that part of you inside is like, no, this is the tough guy. This is the good guy. This is the strong guy, not that guy. And finding the way to bridge that spot is, I think it's you know, it's, I think that I would be surprised if we ever get to a place where it's not there. How much it's there, how much it matters, I don't know. Um, but I think it's always going to be part of us just because it's part of humanity, right? It's David and Goliath. You know, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of examination into what that strength is and why people are magnetized to that strong man figure. And without diving into politics, it's clearly still a thing that for whatever reason triggers that reaction. That's the strong man.
Yeah.
And smart enough people go, what are you thinking? That's not, I think you're confusing loud with strong.
Yeah.
You know, and that's that. I mean, like, again, you're getting into humanities. I think it's a amazing discussion and topic, and I am very fascinated with those kinds of things. And there's a lot of personal stories for myself that I could tie into that, and I relate to that. But I do think we do it better now than they did in '62. Not night and day, but certainly better. Hopeful. I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
And I got you out there, man. We're all representing clearly that we're not, you know, out there trying to take advantage of women and whatnot. I think we're sort of men of our time now, and we have to represent and be those guys who, hopefully, if somebody's listening, we can help direct them away from being something that maybe they shouldn't be.
Yeah. Excellent.
One of my favorite quotes that kind of to me is very indicative, or it's reflective of some of those sentiments, and it just sticks with me always. Is it takes strength to be gentle and kind.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Here.
Well, I appreciate you too. Thank you for joining me and allowing me to go down the rabbit hole a little bit with the philosophical musings, ruminations, as we like to say.
This is exactly what ruminations are.
Exactly. Ruminations. Yeah, thank you so much for having us on, man.
So thank you for joining us too, dear listeners. Definitely check us out on the ruminationsradionetwork.com for this podcast and for many, many other podcasts that we're just I think we're just starting, hitting the ground running, but
we're just getting started.
Yeah, we're getting it. It's been really nice. I just listened to the RoboCop episode last night over at Retro Featurist, and yeah, it was really nice hearing those guys.
Doesn't it make you just want to watch the movie like immediately?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a great episode.
Oh, I really thoroughly enjoyed it, but totally, I need to find that movie.
Yeah, let's all go rent it right now.
If you're a digital person, I think it's cheap on a lot of the
it's like
vendors out there.
Yeah, on YouTube or something. It's really good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. So, dear listeners, please subscribe, rate us on wherever you find your favorite podcasts, and definitely keep in touch with us through all the socials. You can reach me at basically all my socials are the same, Anthony Pavelich. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.
See you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.